And that one's going. Well, welcome everybody. Let's get this meeting started. This is Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting number 4, Ocean Renewable Energy, Department of State Lands. Okay. All right. Let's go around the room. We have one person on the phone. I'm Chris Castelli, Policy and Legislative Analyst for the Department of State Lands.
Jason Bush, Executive Director of Oregon Wave Energy Trust.
Rick Williams, Lattice Maritime Solutions.
Laurel Hillman, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department.
Scott McMullen, Oregon Fishermen's Cable Committee.
Otto Using, Lincoln County Planning.
Charlie Flyman, Surfrider Foundation.
Delia Kelly, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Mike DeBlasi, Department of State Lands.
Joanne Manson, Oregon Military Department.
Kirk Jarvie, State Lands.
Jerry Hudson, Department of State Lands.
And Sabrina, Department of State Lands.
A couple housekeeping notes.
Online.
And who's joining us via phone today?
Justin Kluwer, Pacific Energy Ventures.
Thank you, Justin. Welcome. A couple housekeeping notes. The bathrooms, if you were here last meeting, you'll recall the bathrooms around the corner and to the left. The water fountain is over there as well. And we have cookies at the table and extra copies of materials if you need anything.
And notice the cookies are the correct color.
That's right.
For this time of year.
No. Better than green and yellow.
Sort of welcome and introductions. Is there any just general issues anyone wants to talk about briefly before we start into the rest of the agenda? And I will remember everyone, let's try to use name tags. Jerry will do our best to try to make sure everyone gets called upon so it's fair. So looks like Jason's first.
Sure, I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that the National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL, has a project. They're seeking to deploy 2 wave buoys that measure the energy in the waves, and an ADCP, an acoustic Doppler current profiler, which is mounted on the bottom. Their plan was to deploy 2 buoys and an ADCP associated with one of the buoys. The locations are in the lakeside revised Dressa and at the in an area off Reedsport, essentially the old OPT site. They are a little bit behind now, and they're not going to get that in as early as they hoped, and it's pushing it further and further out into the fall, and so the weather window is getting narrower and narrower. So we're not sure they're actually going to be successful this year, but the idea is to get it in this year. It will be in for 1 year. They're about to submit an application to DSL for site lease and for and whatever permits are appropriate under the section 125, 141-125. A company called Integral is the consulting deployment company, and HT Harvey is their environmental permitting subcontractor. After they brought this to our attention, they ended up contracting with OET to do some outreach to make sure that they had done adequate outreach to the affected communities. We've already started that. I hope that most folks in this room have heard about this already by now. We've already gone to the fishing organizations, and Katie Hildebrand has been helpful in getting the word out. And the one issue that is still sort of outstanding is there are some initial coordinates that have been selected that are sort of optimal for the wave measurement devices. However, we did request that they build in some flexibility so that those exact location can be modified if there's a sort of good reason to do so. And so at this point, I don't think there's been any feedback from the fishing industry that those particular sites are more problematic or better than any other sites. So they appear to be moving forward with those. So that's about all I know. Again, it's not my project, but we are helping to make sure that the word gets out. questions?
Yeah, a comment that I had heard after request for information that even though there is acoustic release associated with this device, that all of the anchor mooring will come back up and be recovered, and it'll be nothing left on the seabed. So
Correct.
great job.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just for clarification, the other alternative is a sandbag, right?
It's one, yeah.
Yeah, one. And because how are they getting the whole thing up?
The ADCP,
The anchor.
clump weights.
So the pop up and then it's hard connected to the clump weight.
Well, the buoy is connected directly to the clump weights
Okay. And then the pop up messenger will give them a line
for the ADCP.
Okay.
Just checking.
So I can't resist the opportunity to ask a question that apparently under the existing regulatory process, it wasn't deemed to be so burdensome that they couldn't do what they need to do.
Well, that's funny you raise that. I'll say first of all that I feel like the companies that were hired to do the permitting for this project are not Oregon based, and they were not particularly familiar with requirements. And there have been a few surprises that popped up, and there is, I think that in general, having now kind of worked through this with them, I think that the permitting process for the scientific measurement devices under Section 125 are entirely appropriate and commensurate with the sort of type of project they're doing. The one issue that has come up is the requirement to post a bond to ensure the complete decommissioning of the project. That is one of the issues that I think they were not anticipating, and that they would be required to post up to about $100,000 bond, which is not insignificant. And they're now working with the agency to figure out what that looks like and what the actual requirement would be. And it's pushed their project back a little bit because they did not anticipate needing to post that bond.
Do you have an idea then, so what does it take to post it? So the 100K would be something goes wrong and we need to tap the 100K, right? That's
The state would have access to it to ensure that everything comes out.
yeah. So it's just kind of, to me, it's always just informative to know. So what does it cost to float, to more or less get a 100K bond that has a year-long duration type thing? I mean, what does that begin to look like as a cost? It's just-
And I don't know. I think they're going to figure that out soon. I think in this case it's just a little odd for them because it's a National Renewable Energy Lab. Surely they have $100,000 laying around somewhere, but I do know how
that
it
it
is.
shouldn't be a problem.
Well, it is in the sense that everything that they spend is very highly dictated by the Department of Energy. So it's not like they have a cash account sitting there that's just available. I'm sure they can make this happen. In the future, I'm sure they'll be more prepared to make it happen. In this particular case, it has certainly set them back on their heels a little bit.
So, thank you, Jason. Let's try to make these just brief updates so we can get to the agenda item 2. We'll just go around. You can put yours up. I think Scott's next.
Okay.
Well, this maybe should be for the good of the order at the end, but I just thought people might be interested in knowing that Brad Pettinger, part of OPAC and familiar to many of us here, was selected as a White House Champion of Change, and he's receiving an award tomorrow in Washington, D.C.
Congratulations to
There's
Brad.
a live, if anybody wants the information, I'll give you the link to follow it live tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
There's a nice feature on the White House website, is it?
So is that like MSC certification type stuff? Or?
It was kind of recognizing his
Sustainable seafood.
Yeah, his long-standing efforts in the trawl industry.
Along that line, Scott's lines there, I just have sort of a good order thing. I know a lot of people here on OPAC are involved. Or have contact with the Governor's Natural Resource Office. They're pretty short-handed right now. You might already be aware of that. I was talking to Scott about it earlier. Gabrielle Goldfarb has left the Governor's Natural Resource Office to go to DHS, Health Services, Human Services, one of those. Brett Brownstone, if you're familiar with some of the fish and wildlife issues or the Eastern Region sage grouse issues, he's left as well to go to Oregon Consensus, which put them down to 2 natural resource advisors, Lori Onan and Richard. And just a week ago, they had all the duties for the natural resource agency split between the two. And as you maybe saw the press release yesterday, Richard will be the interim director at DEQ starting on the 15th of October. So more to come on that. He's been the Department of State Lands Natural Resource Advisor for quite some time, and the governor's advisor on the state land board, or her land board assistant. So I thought you might want to know that.
What was the lady's name that's now the last person in?
Lori Onan.
Onan?
Yeah, Aunan.
Who was with DEQ
Never heard of her.
for a long time.
Yeah, she was. Yeah, she was, and she's been the governor's legislative coordinator. She's rounded up the state agents, natural resource agencies during sessions. Kind of been her job, both the last regular session and the last short session. So more to come there. We have a land board meeting next Tuesday. The waterway leasing rules, the department's waterway leasing rules are up for review and adoption. Thank you to anyone who served on that. We're making advisory committee. I know Charlie did. I don't know if anyone else on this rack did. We also have some general business, some permanent easements. And I think we're doing our annual removal fill report as well. We expect a large turnout of protesters. It's our last regular meeting before they listen to proposals on the Elliott State Forest, the sale of the Elliott State Forest, transfer of the Elliott State Forest, which is in December. And that's pretty much the only thing on the agenda for December, which will also be the last regular meeting of this iteration of the land board. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Chris, you're sharing that because what does that have to do with our other thing?
It's just a quick update.
Yeah, because our is a product out of here scheduled to sort of hit the land board when?
Probably in the spring or April, June of next year. So you'll have a different land board.
So if I might, Chris, just offer a quick response to Mr. Husing's earlier question about the cost of a bond. Yeah. So I can take a quick stab at that just based on my experience. Of course, it depends on what your credit rating is and what the nature of the risk is associated with the project. But one would typically expect to see this sort of performance bond come in at around a couple percent to upwards of 10% of the face value of the bond. That is, if it's a higher risk project, you're a higher risk person, you're up 10+%. You're at the low end of that, it could be as low as maybe 2-ish%, 3-ish%. That's Kirk Jarvis, Department of State Lands.
Great, thank you for that.
Rick Williams, Lighthouse Maritime. Piling on what Jason talked about and what Ano asked and Kirk answered. When folks come into the state, they don't know the Oregon way. If there's a way of describing, here's how you go get that, and I understand the state would be under constraints of not recommending one way or another, but if there was a, the non-denominational call for anybody who's willing to do this in a state step-by-step guide, and if that was still not in accordance with your procedures, maybe the industry association could do that. Because if you go to one place and their answer is, you want what for why? It's going to be a long road. But if there's some people who've already done this, who know why we do this, then we will help the people coming into the state or who are here and aren't aware of this anyway.
Didn't PEV do a roadmap thing exercise, but regulatory? There was some.
Yeah, but I don't think arranging a bond was part of that.
Yeah, I agree. The excellent work that PEV did, which is available on the website, is, I wouldn't call it high level. It certainly lists just about everything needs to be done, but it does not go into the specifics of bonding promise, for example. For that matter, some of the laws have changed. SB 30206, of course, eliminated the self-insurance option. So there's some details there that have to be worked out. And I must say that being part of this, sort of watching the thing unfold, it's been a little bit of an eye-opener. There really needs to be some dialogue, the pre-meeting concept that's been talked about. What's the term you all use for it? The Kaizen? Man, that really seems to me like a good idea, because the detailed issues that can creep up and bite you when you think you've got everything in order is significant. So I certainly see the value in this Kaizen pre-meeting approach to talking about any kind of these projects.
Doesn't look like anyone else has any opening comments at the table. Justin, two things. Do you have any comments, and can you hear us okay? Justin, are you there?
We don't hear you. He's probably
Are you on mute? Okay, maybe we lost Justin.
I'm going to ping him here.
Okay. Well, it's nice we had a few minutes to talk about this, because actually I think our follow-up section is going to go pretty quickly. I actually need to, Andy Lanier from DLC couldn't make it today, and I have a few things to touch base upon with him prior to really answering the transmission of cable question and also the flow chart. But I can let you know, I can certainly let Captain Rick and Scott talk about it, but they both had some correspondence with regards to what would be maybe an appropriate area and way of delineating an area for first right to apply for ocean users, for that stakeholder group, something that made sense. And be happy to let you guys talk about it, or you can...
I'll open and then I'll ask Scott to tell us what we decided. The issue was, when you're a mariner, there's precision and accuracy. You can be told you have to be at a precise place, and you can do that within the accuracy of your navigation, and not everybody has GPS, and it doesn't always work. So you have to consider that when you're at sea, there's a reasonable area of uncertainty that you ought to acknowledge yourself and other people ought to recognize. And so Scott and I talked about what's a reasonable size. And Scott, do you recall what was it?
Yeah, yes. Scott Long, part of the issue was there was already a unit measure in the draft language, and it had said 50 acres. But 50 acres isn't a useful term for a mariner because we don't deal with acres on the ocean. So we came up with a fairly close equivalent of 0.25 nautical mile by 0.25 nautical mile, which is, I think, 53 acres. And so that's what we
can understand that, but you know, it's like hogsheads per fortnight, you know, as opposed to flow rate, you know. Gee, what's a hogshead?
Hogsheads per fortnight. Well, sounds great. Thank you for getting together kind of offline and working on that. It works for me. I've actually put in a source of draft rule language already and put in parentheses 53 acres because that's the sort of numbers actually work well for our proprietary coordinators that I keep track of. And if we are building that area out, it's usually going to be, if it's in a demonstration phase, like per acre.
Is that nautical acres or regular?
Regular acres, whatever my calculator turned it into.
I've never asked that question before.
That's why you had me.
And Delia has a question.
Yeah, so if it's a square quarter nautical mile, does it have to be a square? There's a lot of projects that would want to do, so you just want to be careful in the way, the language that you choose. Because if it is written that it's a quarter mile by quarter mile, then that's what you could do as a square.
That would be a square. Yeah. Rick has a
which is a very good point. One of my rants is don't require a mooring and an anchorage to go into a square because you're suboptimizing the naval architecture design. You know, the ocean doesn't work in squares except in things that humans do. So I think you're right. An area, you know, approximately quarter nautical mile by quarter nautical mile, approximately 53 acres, you know, allows a proper design for a proper anchoring and mooring. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you, Delia. So after our last meeting, I had a very brief opportunity to touch base with Andy Lanier with regards to how any cables associated with a ocean renewable energy facility. They fall in between the Part 5 and Part 4. Unfortunately, we weren't able to touch base much in the subsequent weeks afterwards and couldn't make today's meeting. But basically, the conditions and provisions of Part 4 do apply. We think we can continue to administer cables associated with a project under these ocean renewable energy rules and right into the policy section that the provisions of Part 4 need to be met for that. I do have a couple of outstanding questions for Andy that needed some further research from their section, Patty and others over there at DLCD that he hasn't been able to get back to me at. So I have a memo that's just about done for you guys, but not ready to share that today. And the same thing goes for the flow chart. Charlie, you asked about it. I have a very ugly one that I started here, but I also need some input from Andy on that, and I need to actually hope to get Sabrina's help in the near future to make it much easier on the eyes. So both of these, I hope to get to you guys well before the next meeting, and then with some more draft rule language to follow up a couple weeks before the next meeting. So that's kind of where we are with those. But Charlie, as an aside, I'll be happy to show you this at a break.
I'm not in a hurry, but it will be helpful moving forward for me.
Great, thank you. Justin, are you there?
He has not responded to my pings either.
He's not responsive. Okay. I think we're ready to start looking at some removal field regulatory rules.
I'm here, Chris. I'm 62 months to get my views off, so go ahead.
Justin, it's good to hear your voice. I don't know if you missed much, but we did do a quick roundtable, and some folks had shared sort of updates for the good of the order. I wanted to give you the opportunity if there's anything you thought the group needed to hear about.
Yeah, no, nothing particular from my end, and I've been on since the beginning, so I've been listening and up to date on everything. So I appreciate you checking in.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, Kirk Jarvie and one of our natural resource coordinators, aquatic resource coordinators, Mike DeBlasi, who some of you might know, I believe you permitted M3, are going to walk us through a couple different regulatory rule division proposals.
Okay, and I'll kick it off. Mike will take you through the body of our proposed general permit language for the research and demonstration projects. So before that we talk about the general permit, I did want to make you aware that as a result of Senate Bill 319, there are some changes we need to make to our Division 85 rules. The Division 85 rules are really all about a couple of things. One, they kind of reestablish our authority to regulate activities in wetlands and waterways in Oregon. It lays out the individual permit process for individual removal fill permits. That's kind of our biggest areas pathway for authorizing projects. And Division 85 also talks a lot about our enforcement authorities, as well as our authorities to require mitigation when appropriate. So I'm going to start a little bit out of order from what's in your agenda packet. So if I could call your attention to the document up at top, it says proposed rule changes for Division 141-085. It's in the red line strikeout mode. So I'll wait for you to get that in front of you. So again, these are changes that come as a result of mostly Senate Bill 319, and they're basically taking language verbatim from 319 and dropping it in the right place in Division 85. I'm not expecting there to be any substantive discussion, but I did want you, just in the spirit of transparency, to be aware that we are proposing some changes to 085. So I'll walk through those, but I see there's going to be a question, Scott?
I just was noting there's one typo that can change the meaning of paragraph 63.
Okay.
As a second line, as a necessary component or a research project. I think that should be of.
It is. Thank you for catching that. That is important. Thank you. So under the definitions, ocean renewable energy facility or ocean renewable energy are both terms that are defined in 319. They're not really open for discussion. They are what they are. And we're going to adopt them in Division 85. Territorial sea plan, yeah, we got to define those, and those everybody knows what those definitions are already. The next place is under 0520. This
Sir,
is where
before
Sure.
we push the I believe button on that,
Okay.
there are ocean renewable energy systems that are not intended to produce electricity. They produce desalinized water or a storage vector like hydrogen. And so how do we deal with the Resolute Marine Energy project at Camp Rylea, which although they have an electrical module, you know, its intention is it's also for desalinized water, like in the Cascadia event response phase. You know, we could deploy one of these things and use ocean renewable energy to provide desalinized water for a field hospital. And I just want to make sure that we're not excluding ourselves because we didn't think about that.
Okay. So the best I can do to respond to that, Rick, is really just go back to 319, and it does say ocean renewable energy means electricity that is generated through the conversion, etc. So are any of the technologies you're talking about, they generate no electricity?
Well, as long as people are on the same wavelength, if you'll pardon the pun, but it uses electricity to run pumps to make desalinized water.
Okay.
You know, but it's the kind of thing that, you know, if you ask them what's the purpose of it, it's to produce desalinized water. Is there electricity along the way as a byproduct? Yes, but you know, that's a different, you know, a waves to wire project and a pumper or alternative method.
I got you. So we can certainly confirm this with DOJ, but I think a plain reading of the definitions of 319 would suggest that if it generates electricity for whatever use, it's then used to desalinate water or to run somebody's toaster. You know, after that, kind of who cares? But we can certainly check in with DOJ to make sure that's a legit.
I think one point is, as I read it, information about that project, you could actually have it where it didn't produce electricity and just use water coming ashore, so that there isn't any actual electricity generated as a result of it. So it could be a situation where you create power but you don't create electricity.
So we have Charlie and then Jason.
So, if I'm hearing you correctly, we're talking about now something other than ocean renewable energy. We're talking about facilities that maybe are powered by themselves, but are, in a sense, a desal plant.
Well, it's a ocean renewable energy power function.
Right, which tells you that's something, to me, that's like not the intent of, yeah, those are different rules. Because what I don't want to do here is open up the door for a process for desalination on our coast, or other projects that may need a lot of other sorts of resource considerations beyond what we've done within the Territorial Sea Plan thus far for ocean energy. So I think a number of constituents would act, and Oregonians would act very differently about the purpose of the project. And as you stated, the purpose, you know, in 319 and what we're explicitly looking at here is ocean renewable energy. I think there's room in there with research and demonstration, but I do have concerns about projects that are beyond what we're talking about, which is ocean renewable energy.
Well, it's clearly a definitional thing, but I think the permitting process would identify any issues associated with it. I can speak for the Camp Rylea Resolute Marine demonstration. They're going to bring seawater in, demonstrate desalinization, and then mix it back so that they're not discharging brine, because we pointed out that's a whole separate issue.
Right.
And so in that case, the demonstration will have an electrical module, a desal module that the desalinization will occur, and they'll remix it and put, the original constituents back into the ocean, just to avoid that issue. But, I don't want to make sure that, I want to make sure that we don't narrow this too far.
Jason.
With some concern of complicating the conversation even further, there are some companies that see sort of half of their capability in the water, pumping a hydraulic system, being able to pump water, as testable in and of itself or useful in and of itself. And if it's useful in and of itself, it is for moving sediment out of a given area. So there's some folks that know that dredging an area is one way to keep an area open. Another way is to have something in it that's constantly taking sand and sediment and moving it back out around a corner or something. And so having just had my conference, I know I had a couple of conversations where companies were still talking about this, in particular around the Port Orford area. And so that just sort of comes to mind that in this case you're not producing electricity. It probably, now that I think about it, probably goes beyond the pale of what we're doing here anyway. But if you were testing or demonstrating whether or not it works to be able to move sediment through a tube somewhere else, either up to shore or somewhere else, I don't know whether we want to bring that within this discussion or not, but at least it's out there as an option.
So I just want to say, and I'll give Scott a chance. I guess we can't mess with the definitions. They're all both in Chapter 274 of a state statute. Now they have to stay exactly the same as they are in the statute and the administrative rule. It is a good time to discuss these things with both the legislation that's passed prior and even Part 5 is meetings. Actually, one thing I wouldn't mind getting some input from you guys at the end of the process about what you might think would be good policy tweaks going forward. We don't have any legislative concepts this session, but there is a session coming up, and we're always looking for good ways to better our policy as a state. Scott.
I think you said almost what I was going to say, is that the legislature made the rule that they did, right or wrong, it's already done. So it's, as I understand it, maybe Kirk can confirm this, it's got to be a legislative fix if we don't like the language that we have now.
That's correct. It would need to be a legislative fix.
Well, I heard Rick say, limiting different projects or limiting the scope, and my interpretation is that, this is for a specific subset of project types, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a permitting structure that could be used for other. So it'd just be different rules, different permitting structure. It's not excluded.
Okay, so it's not an exclusion, it's just a definition. Thank you.
I think you need to add a typo on 93. Territorial Sea Plan has, you probably need to.
Oh, yes.
Little T in.
Has he meeting, yes.
Shortest comment I'll ever make.
Tough crowd.
But just to follow up on that, I mean, Kirk, is there a question, interpretation question we need to ask DOJ?
So I think I will check in with DOJ. It's pretty clear that the definition says means electricity. We know what electricity means. I think the only question in my mind is it does it matter where in the process the electricity is generated? If it's ultimately tied back to something that's in the ocean that's creating that kinetic energy that eventually gets converted to electricity, is that good enough to put it in this definition? I guess that's the question.
You might want to share. My understanding of the project that Rick was talking about was that the power is generated on shore, water. If I'm not mistaken, water is pumped ashore, so everything in the ocean is just water. The electricity comes on the shore.
But the electricity isn't generated but for what's in the ocean.
Right, so wave energy sends pressurized water ashore through hoses. The Pelton turbine is in a module, and that's one of the modes of ocean renewable energy.
Yeah.
And then there are useful things like toasters and hair dryers and cookie makers that come off the electricity, including a desalinated water plant. And so for the purpose of the demonstration at Camp Rilea, there are guidelines around it to make sure that it's not a brine generator. Because we identified that early on and said, you're getting a whole separate thing if you're going to be discharging brine. So they understood that and took that to heart. But, in the Camp Rilea Resolute Marine project is electricity and some uses of it.
Thank you. And Otto and then Joanne.
Just, and it's sort of a little far afield what we're talking about here, but on this desalinization thing, because I can see where it's a very compelling application for arid communities that really don't have water, that all of a sudden, and cost factors are less of a consideration when you don't have water, but in all the conversations I've had up and down the Oregon coast with people preparing for Cascadia, there's so much water that is here already on the Oregon coast. What we're telling people at home, and it's not that there's a lack of water, so the idea that we need to bring some from the sea for water, there's tons of water here in streams, and it's just making sure that it's filtered for human use. So that's what we're telling everybody, to get these straws of this and that. But am I missing something here? That why would we need to bring water from the ocean on land?
So let me speak to something I know of, and then you can expand it to the things that you know of. If you're at Camp Rilea in the recovery phase, there's no water there. I mean, other than the rain. And so if you're going to have a field hospital, you're going to need to either bring in water, and the roads to Camp Rilea are flooded. So yes, there's water there, but how do you get water to you? The roads will be disrupted, the bridges will be down,
but not the offshore energy device.
Well, let me finish. The liquid fuels are going to be compromised. So what we're talking about in that case is an amphibious support from Army Reserve to bring in response and recovery phase power sources. So, is there water? Yes. Can you get to it? Maybe yes, maybe no. And that's part of the thing. The Macaw village at Nia Bay is in a rainforest, and they're woefully short of drinking water just because of the natural watershed. So they're very interested in this, as are the Alaskan villages.
Joanne's.
So I just wanted to speak to the definition. It is very narrow. It clearly equates ocean renewable energy with electricity, and really you can generate lots of different types of energy from the ocean other than electricity. So that is a constraint of this particular rule and law, and that happens a lot with laws that are written by people. So I would ask that it be clarified when an application comes along like this, how is DSL going to identify and coordinate with which review process and stakeholders and regulatory agencies, if there are any, that would oversee that process. I think that needs to be clarified, and since this group has raised it as an issue, perhaps get that role from DOJ and other state agencies. Thanks.
Thank you.
Got it. Thank you, John. Okay, well, I think in the interest of time, remember this was supposed to be the easy one. So back to Division 85. Bottom of page 1 there, 0520 is where we define our cubic yard thresholds for regulation. Those are given to us by statute. So we need to add one specific for ocean renewable energy facilities, because Senate 319 tells us that the cubic yard threshold needs to be 0 for our regulatory authority. So that's simply what that sentence says. Any amount greater than 0 cubic yards in the territorial sea for this type of project needs a regulatory approval from DSL. Here come the cards. Okay. Go ahead, Delia.
So, would that apply to a project on the OCS with a cable transiting the territorial sea? if the bulk of the facility is outside of state waters, just the cable easement, the cable easement is the trigger for DSL's proprietary action, and so within that trigger the zero threshold for the removal fill.
No, that would be the standard 50 cubic yard threshold.
And that cable, unless part of that ocean renewable energy facility is within the territorial sea, that cable would be treated under Part 4. There would be a Part 5 state application.
So the cable is not filled? Or is it filled?
The cable would still be filled, but the threshold would not be zero for it, because it may be associated with an ocean renewable energy facility, it won't be associated with an ocean renewable energy facility within the state's jurisdiction. It will just be electrical transmission cable coming across.
So just to clarify a bit, so if you're laying a cable across 3 miles of the territorial sea and you're burying it to be consistent with Part 4, chances are pretty good you're going to be above 50 cubic yards because just that burial process. If you imagine a plow a couple feet wide and a couple feet deep, you're going to go over 50 really quick.
And then there would be a cable easement.
Well, the scale of the cable would get you there, probably too.
And, yeah, the cable alone, but even the plowing as well all counts as removal.
So there would likely be a state removal fill permit and a cable easement under Part 4.
This wasn't actually my question, but you're saying that if you disturb the bottom, that's removal/fill?
It is, yep, under the removal fill law, that sort of disturbance counts as both removal and fill.
Actually, so I actually don't have a question about that idea that you answered. The next section there, the next page, regarding marine resources. I guess I've always ignored that statement, inventory and evaluation related to marine resources or removal fill. So what is that? What does that mean, related to marine resources? You get the removal fill part, but what is that?
It's a good question, Jason. Straight out of 319. Application for a permit related to marine resources in order removal fill in the territorial sea. So for me in my regulatory program, I don't need to know what marine resources needs because removal fill is kind of what triggers my regulatory interest. So the question would be, what does marine resources mean in the context of the territorial sea plan?
Is that statutory language?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Charlie. I can only guess. Maybe we could punt that one to Andy to weigh in on.
Yeah, so it looks like it's in the, you sort of added it into an existing section W there. I assume that, any removal fill permit in the territorial sea was always subject to Part 2. I don't know if this maybe was related to...
Yeah, so our removal fill rules were historically a little naive. We didn't realize there was any other part but Part 2, because that's the only thing that ever triggered our regulatory interest. And now with this new Senate Bill 319, we now have to care about Part 5. So that's why we modified this language. So anytime there's a project that triggers removal fill jurisdiction in the territorial sea, then you've got to use
So
this.
Kurt, just so we put a finer point on that, so back in the day, before any of the, before 10 dozen years ago, typically any removal fill application for the territorial sea had to do with dredge flow disposal maybe,
Right.
and then ocean outfalls, right? That would have been it?
That would have
Any navigational devices maybe?
They rarely triggered 50 cubic yards, so yeah.
But the telecom cables, which came under Part 4.
What about some of the class or mineral survey stuff?
Never got to
Not anything that got reported to us as being over 50.
We've become a much more active landlord and regulator, I think, for the last 10 years in the territorial sea. I don't know if that answered your question on Scott.
I assumed that, it talks about marine resources, that it was related to this section that we have, the resource inventory checklist and effects evaluation, and all those kinds of things that are in there. Would be considered the marine resources. I hope that's.
Well, that's my thought too, and part 2 has a section on that as well.
Living resources and habitats, probably that's what it was inspired by.
Is there,
That's fine, Delia.
is there a definition somewhere else in 85 of marine resources?
No.
So what I'm hearing is that this doesn't really add anything to the meaning of this language for purposes of the removal fill permit for ocean energy.
It doesn't, and I didn't want to monkey with it because it was already adopted by 319. I felt uncomfortable starting to strip stuff out of it. So, but frankly, in the removal fill program, we're going to ignore the marine resources part of that.
Okay.
The next component is so normally when the removal fill permit, we have basically after the close of the public review period, we are obligated to make our permit decision within 60 days after that. 319 gives us a little bit of wiggle room. It does allow us to extend that permit decision deadline if necessary to basically sync up our regulatory permit with the partnering proprietary approval. And that can be done at the director's discretion. Is that clear to folks?
Has it always been 90 days under this rule, under the use guidelines that you
Yes.
have? It's always been 90 days.
Well, since at least 2003.
Okay.
Yeah.
By syncing up, you simply mean so that a single order can be issued?
So that's something we haven't worked out yet. One option is DSL could work it out so that we issue one piece of paper that is your regulatory and proprietary approval altogether, or we issue 2 pieces of paper but at the same time.
I will tell you, Jason, hopefully this is good news for the industry. I think Kirk and I are dedicated to make sure you only have to submit 1 application
Indeed.
to the department. You might get 2 authorizations back, but we don't want you to have to apply on 2 different pieces of paper.
There's some redundant information, clearly.
Yeah, I think a lot of
that
it.
makes sense.
Wouldn't it be the exact same as the submarine cables? You have a regulatory authorization and an easement both?
Yeah.
And you make 1 application, but you get 2 authorizations back?
I actually don't know if we streamlined that process as much. I think they might apply for 2 different application forms for that. But that's another good one. We don't see a lot of those, and we probably won't see a lot of these right off the bat either. But I think it's something we should note. And if in situations where we have a coordinated project, and there's this type of coordinated, i.e. implementing part of the territorial sea plan, it would be nice if we head towards a single application.
One step at a time.
That's a generous grant of discretionary authority to the director of DSL, because you're not saying, you're not providing an outer limit by, you gotta do it by a certain date either.
Correct.
So,
All right,
That's
and
correct.
we don't need your permission as the applicant to extend it either. If we need to extend it in order to make sure that Chris's work is lining up with my work for issuance at the same time, then we'll just extend the deadline.
I'll just note Senate Bill 319, which wasn't an agency bill, addressed 2 points coming out of Part 5 when DLCD had the Part 5 working group, their RAC, and when DLCD behind the scenes working with the other state agencies was trying to find an agency to champion Part 5 or be the home for it, the implementation of it. They were always looking at DSL, but DSL's regulatory program is one that would usually come up as a regulatory program to implement something like that, but it had the 2 holes in it. One, there wasn't necessarily always going to be a removal fill permit required because of the 50 cubic yard threshold. And 2, they have set pretty tight statutory timelines for authorizing something, which would not lend itself to a JART process, which may have some iterations that go back and forth.
Yeah, Arnold raises a good point. But the outside discretion there, I guess I'm comfortable with it, because if we can establish the right sideboards for this sort of facilitated permitting for R&D, if the applicant is providing adequate information and it fits within the comfort zone of what the state wants in terms of promoting these types of technologies, then I think that's adequate. If there's a problem with the technology, the state needs more time to determine whether something is appropriate for our waters, then I think the state should be able to do that. So as an industry representative, I guess I certainly want to see certainty in the process and reduce time and cost. But I feel like we're setting up a pretty good set of parameters here that promote the kind of projects that we seem to be collectively supportive of. So I'm okay with that discretion.
Yeah, because in our department, trust me, we're constantly looking at we call it the shot clock. That someone's made an application to us, and by God, you better get this. It's a bad day at the office if you missed your timeline, and all of a sudden it's deemed approved. And let's say it's something that's very unpopular with people, then oh my God, you get a lot of explaining to do. But I sense you're comfortable with this because you won't be, your interest groups won't be comfortable with this if there's a change in the political winds and suddenly there's less enthusiasm for offshore energy and that an applicant anticipates there's foot drag going on. Then all of a sudden you won't be so comfortable and you'll be back asking for firmer time frames. Just a little editorial, how these things usually play out.
John?
No response requested.
So last item that we'd be modifying for Division 85 is Division 85 includes a description of our considerations and determinations that we have to make when deciding whether or not to issue a permit. Senate Bill 319 tells us we need to consider one more thing, and that is Department will only authorize removal fill for ocean renewable energy facility that complies with the criteria described in that part of the TSP that addresses development of ocean renewable energy facilities. So basically, as we're at the end of this process, making sure that it complies with all the statute, we do have to do a crosswalk with the TSP. Obviously, we'll be doing it before that, but at least by the end of the process, we have to make sure it's consistent with the TSP.
Would that, as a practical matter, really be a front-loaded consideration?
Yes.
Yeah, I always wondered about that. It's like you've adopted a state policy, so do you actually need each agency to adopt a rule that says that our decisions are going to be consistent with the territorial sea plan? It's just a hypothetical question because clearly you're going to do it, but I've always wondered about that language in 319.
Yeah. So my thought is, I think it's just a transparency item for folks that know that always want to know exactly what their application is going to be weighted or evaluated against. We certainly can't deny that TSP consistency will be one of those things. So let's just be transparent about it. Make it a clear consideration.
Well, do you see yourself even establishing a JART if on its face it's not square with the TSP? I mean, that's why I just think it'll be pretty evident whether, well, most of the territorial sea is open for development anyway, so it shouldn't be, as a practical matter, when 90% of the territorial sea can be applied for. I doubt the issue is going to come up very much.
I would think if somebody was trying to put a project in an exclusion area, we would do our best to go ahead and just
the few areas that
try to send them somewhere
categorically taken off the table.
Captain.
We also, in our last meeting, talked about the Kaizen multi-agency process as a screening before cranking up the JART and subjecting our citizens to meeting fatigue. That the Kaizen process would screen out the well-intentioned but misguided people who might otherwise get us cranking through the JART process.
A certain Scottish company comes to mind.
A certain German student from Berkeley comes to mind.
I just was wondering what the Kaizen process. I've never heard of Kaizen.
Talk about the Kaizen.
So Kaizen process, it's a format that was created by DEQ a few years ago. And the idea was to bring state and federal regulatory agencies together in a common venue where project applicants or pre-applicants that have complex projects that cut across multiple state and federal agencies to come to one place at one time to really get the full picture of what the regulatory environment requirements will be for their project.
And it used to have the name like the one-stop shopping group.
So Business Oregon uses the term one shop for their needs.
Yeah.
Way back, once upon a time, DSL ran something similar to this called the SWIM.
But multi-agency vetting early on, yeah.
The idea is both state and federal.
So it's the same as what they used to call pre-application meeting?
So it's pre-application. It's really early to really get your feel for, wow, there's a lot more regulation here than I thought. This isn't for me.
And it's held once a month on a reasonable schedule so that you can tell people you need to get on the agenda.
Correct.
It also gives kind of a cooling off period for this kind of thing that we saw. That, okay, you need to get on the agenda a month away. Oh, well, I want this to go in next month. Let's talk.
Jason.
So regarding the Kaizen, so I understand now that it's a formal program. I'm hearing you guys, like for example, at our conference, Mike had to step out because you had a Kaizen meeting that day for a couple hours. So this is up and running. It happens, I guess, on a monthly basis or quarterly basis. So taking the example of this NREL company organization that wants to deploy a scientific device, and they were not all that effective initially in understanding what the permitting requirements would be associated with that. So I think they would have benefited had they sat down for an hour with a panel of agency personnel and sort of chatted about the sort of scope of what they wanted to do and what the expectations for permitting and requirements would be. But how do they know to do that in advance?
Yeah.
Well, can I say something?
Yes, please.
Well, this conversation is making me wonder, is it something we should consider pointing to in rule, or can we do it as a policy of some sort? I don't even know what the future of the Kaizen meeting is.
So, because Kaizen is not a body that's created by administrative rule or statute, it's just something that the agencies are doing as a good public service.
Thank you.
I'm nervous about pointing to it.
Well, Jason,
That makes sense.
isn't any serious developer outside of maybe the student from Timbuktu or something, but the gonna contact you anyway because they're like, or do you find out something from other agencies?
Yeah, that's the case of the German guy. Now, granted, he's not insignificant. He's at the West Berkeley National Lab. He's a PhD student, but he followed an application, and I knew nothing about it. And the agency called me and said, "Who is so and so?" I know who he is, but I didn't know that he was filing an application to deploy his device at Camp Ilea
In 6 months.
not
Without
the way
permission.
But now that I know that the Kaizen is an established program, when I do hear about a proposed project, whether it's a scientific research project or something more significant, then my answer from this point forward will be, well, okay, I highly recommend you contact following individuals for this Kaizen meeting and get on their agendas to talk through what this looks like for you. As long as I'm around to do that.
Charlie, then Anna.
Well, I mean, maybe that's a role that Oregon Wave Energy Trust can play in providing sort of the information on your website, and otherwise, I would hope that most individuals interested in developing in Oregon would look into communication with OWA. I mean, given, I think you're right, putting in a rule, this is kind of a malleable, potentially changing process over time, but maybe that's going to be a resource that is provided there. It may change, it may become a different body, it may be a different thing. You wouldn't want to do it for that reason.
Otto and then Captain.
So typically the way the state works on permitting is that there's a time-honored concept that relates directly to what we're talking about here called a land use compatibility statement, or a LUX. And so virtually across the board, whether it's an ODOT access permit for a highway or a DSL permit, you're routed down to the local government, city or the county, and before you guys start getting laddered up, you want to know that the activity squares with the land use system. Thank God we did that finally for marijuana, because one of the reasons we had so many problems was at first that the folks didn't listen to us, and there was no Lux process, and that created an awful lot of heartache and misunderstanding. So I think this is analogous, though. Before I fire up a chart and everything like that, it seems like someone's going to go to Andy or something like that and say, Andy, pull out Marine Map and make sure that this isn't in one of the few areas that we can't approve it, right? As a threshold question. And so is that sort of articulate? It's not articulated necessarily that you have such a, because in this case you're standing in the shoes of what would otherwise be a city or a county in terms of being the keepers of the plan.
Right. So in the existing Department's proprietary ocean renewable energy rules, there is one of the first things talks about a preliminary process where anybody who wants to construct, maintain facilities shall meet with department staff to discuss the proposed project prior to submitting an application and meet with affected ocean users and other government agencies having jurisdiction in the territorial sea to discuss the project. So it's not, everything's not set in stone, but definitely if someone tried to submit an application, I think the rules are open enough for us to say, we're not going to accept that just yet.
If they're unlucky enough to find the only places they can't do it, then they're going to find out there.
Yeah. Is that very good, Otto?
I sensed you ought to have something that works so well because it just, you stop wasting time because you're not running something up that's going to be a no anyway. You just get that answer up front. That's the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish there, is that someone steered away from a place they need to be steered away from, or they're confirmed like, all right, TSP, that's at least your problem, so you can check that box and move on to something more substantive.
Well, that would definitely, DLC would be one of the other agencies that would be involved in that pre-discussion that's required. Rick?
So this is actually a good news story. This is civil servants serving the people of the state and surrounds with this process they've come up with of their own initiative. And maybe it needs a little information getting out about it. And over the last several weeks, Jason has been assigning me things, and it is approaching the holidays, and it's better to give than receive. So I'd like to give Jason a proposed task that maybe OWET ought to have a news feature about, the effectiveness of local, state, and federal agencies meeting on a routine basis. And then I went to a training session on this. It was hosted by the Society of American Military Engineers last June. So maybe, every 6, 9, 12 months between SAME and OWET, we let people know that this thing is there.
This thing being
The state federal agency scheduled meeting for pre-application.
No, I intended. I'm surprised. I guess I'm sort of surprised I didn't realize the Kaizen was a formal program. I thought it was just something that people would propose for a given project. Like, why don't we have this pre-meeting and we'll all get together? But it sounds like this is a standardized program, and absolutely.
Again, there's the pre-application meeting, which is what you described, where you get people together before the meter starts running.
Yeah.
But then there's this thing that happens every month or so that is scheduled, and Corps of Engineers and DEQ administrator.
So you just get on the agenda a month in advance, or?
I don't know that.
Yeah, so there's a contact at DSL, the Corps, and EPA, 3 primary contacts. You call any of them and say, I've got this project, I'd like to get on the agenda. They'll kind of walk you through what Kaizen's all about to make sure the project's in the right place for Kaizen to deal with it, and it's the right kind of project. We don't care about little rip-rap projects along the street. We deal with those every day.
So the screening before the screening.
Screening for the screening, just make sure it's worthy of 10 regulators really.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a lot of staff time.
Yeah.
And Kirk, I believe Resolute Energy did go through the Kaizen
Did they?
process. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Good.
Justin, you were at that meeting, weren't you?
I don't know.
That's the mute button.
Sticky.
He pleads the fifth. Kirk, I think.
Okay. Should we plow on?
Are we done with that handout?
Yes. Yep. I'm done.
So any other questions on the changes to Division 85. And Justin, if you're there, did you have any questions on Division 85? Hello? Anybody there?
I think you hit the hang up button.
Yeah.
Call back in.
Okay, so everybody okay if we turn our energies now to the general permit specifically for the research and demonstration?
Quick biological break.
Oh, yes. Sure. You know, I call this our 10-minute break?
Yeah, that's okay. 10-minute break.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I know that Joy Vaughn, and she asked me to come to the one sheet.
Have you been throwing up? You sleeping? Get off the computer.
But it does become something.
I think at 17 he could figure some of that out on his own, but he is male, so it's like they revert back to being 5.
Beats eventful and negative. That was one of them.
Yeah, exactly.
You're doing good, though. You're doing good.
Controlled
Yeah, because normally we would have
he couldn't measure your test depth is 9,000 feet. So,
okay, this sounds like it's
no, there was one.
He's going to check it
This one
with
movie
these
after the
cohorts.
20,000.
Let's see.
That's not.
It's like October's.
The narration that I wrote
Basically, we put them on the
was,
agenda.
and Seacliff was back on the
It's not
surface.
until I can
And
put
the
them on the
Admiral
agenda
said,
that Joy will.
yeah, COMSA packed 3,
Okay.
massive sigh of relief.
I'm
Check.
I don't think there is. I don't think there is for a GA, but that's my thinking. But for proprietary, regardless of where it is or what it is, we always require a Lux. And even if it's not within their jurisdiction, we require it saying it is not within our jurisdiction.
But there are no counties in the territorial sea.
In the territorial sea, yeah.
Correct.
We're asking about state land and federal land.
Under the Oregon Constitution, Lincoln County goes out 3 miles.
Yeah, but it's superseded by state law. Closet has the same thing. They just updated their comp plan and they go out too. But it's clear who has jurisdiction of the state's territorial sea.
If people want to endure a lecture from me about something.
I'll go one last terrestrial
There's the order
example.
of governments in America.
One last terrestrial.
State.
I'm sorry. One last terrestrial example that I do recall was BPA lines. BPA was adding a new line in Lane County, and they needed the Lux, which they went and got completed. And in Lane County, when they filled that out, said they needed something additional, of sort of a hefty lift. And at that point, BPA wrote to us with the director and said, okay, we just did this as a courtesy. We don't actually need to get this from Lane County. And I think that was accepted by the department, and the easement went through. But I don't necessarily understand the intricacies of federal government, and that's an example that came to mind from way back.
Scott.
Well, I guess in the question about the authority, it seems like the authority is right here in Division 93, because if you read number 4, individual permit may be required, department may require individual full room permit for a project that would be otherwise be a GP if, and then you go down and it says if ODF&W requests that the department do it. That's the authority if the department requests it, isn't it? I mean, so I don't think we have to go back and source any law. It's right here.
For ODF&W. Yeah.
For ODF&W or DEQ.
Or the effective
Local land use.
So we'll end up living in effective,
It is our call.
So,
which would mirror the federal legislation litigation directly affect under the Coastal Zone Management Act.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that the language as it stands is logical and it makes sense. My only request for distinction is in under the discretion of DSL as the state agency doing the review. The may is in there, and that may is discretionary, and I would ask that when DSL reviews such requests, that it tie back to a reasonable nexus to rules, existing rules, not just lengthy, I don't like it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So Mike's going to take it away. I'm going to ask, so Mike can do this one of two ways. He can kind of go, and my suggestion will be that he go through it from A to Z, so you guys kind of get the full breadth of what's going on, and then we'll talk about it. But
A few clarifying questions before you get started.
Wait, let me finish this up. Or Mike can go through one section at a time, stop after each section and take the comments. We might not get past the first section.
I think you should go through all
Go
of it,
through all?
and then we can.
I'm with you.
I vote for that too.
Give that a try, okay?
But first, so all of these are rules that would show up in 141.085. Is this all new language?
So it'd be in 093, and it's all, so what says, state general permit for certain ocean renewable energy facilities, that's what Mike's going to start walking through. That's Division 93. We just didn't put the numbers on it.
Yeah.
Well, here's the division.
Yep.
Oh, 85, then should have been 93.
Nope.
It's an addition to the
Right, it's either definition.
Are we clear there, Jason?
Not yet. Let me find mine. So these are revisions to not 085, but 095. 093.
93.
It's brand spanking new.
Brand new.
Brand spanking new. So these are additions to, and so the numbers may not be consistent with existing 93.
Yeah, we haven't numbered it.
Okay.
We haven't done any numbering yet.
So, yeah, so we're just going to have to, all right.
Okay, so
So,
just as a reminder,
Division 93.
this is kind of building on the base of the general permit, so all that stuff that's in the base is pretty much in stone now. So the next thing, we'll start off with the purpose. It says the purpose, general permit authorizes the placement and removal of certain ocean renewable energy facilities for research or demonstration projects with purposes within the territorial state. So that's basically the, what is it? We allow, and anything else would be outside. Then under definitions, these are all definitions that have been defined elsewhere. They're just because they're pertinent to here and wanting the definition. I can tell you where they're all from if you're so interested, but I'm sure you're all familiar with them. Move on to eligibility requirements. That's on page 2 or 3. No, 2. Sorry. Eligibility requirements. Activities authorized by this general permit must meet all of the following requirements. 1, research project or demonstration project only.
Define terms.
The project must have completed a JART pre-application meeting pursuant to Division 141-140 and have the recommendation from the JART for processing of this general permit. So far, okay. Projects must be wholly located within one of the following zones as designated in the territorial sea plan.
I think it's Appendix A, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. And I have them listed here, the REFSA, the REPA, and the RUMA. At the very back, for your reference of this document, explains all of the different zones and what's allowed and what isn't.
So Mike, before we go on, let's explain our logic of why we picked those 3 zones, okay?
Okay.
So, so REFSA, so if you look at the back there, you can see the definition of REFSA. So the important thing there is under that definition Renewable energy facility development in these areas is anticipated to have the lowest potential adverse effect on inventory marine resources within safe waters. So for us, that's kind of per the territorial sea plan, that feels like a really logical place to allow these research.
Even if it's not substantively true.
So let's pick that up once we've
No,
done.
that's not for this morning.
So REPAs, why do we pick REPAs? So because those are places where there's already authorizations that have occurred. So if we've already been authorizing projects in those areas, one should assume that those are a green light area potentially for research and demonstration projects under this general permit. The third area are RUMAs, and I kind of can consider this as sort of a conditional area. So for RUMAs, we know that there are important or significant ecological resources, that is acknowledged. Important commercial fishing sectors, recreational fishing, etc. So it says that renewable energy facilities may be sited in a RUMA. Under some circumstances, there is the potential to have significant adverse effects. A proposed proposal in a RUMA must demonstrate that it will have no significant adverse effects on inventory marine resources and uses. So a little bit later on, you're going to hear Mike talk about what the application requirements have to include.
It sounds like a no dead fish rule, but a lot trying to prove that.
So we're going to come back to that when Mike talks about the application requirements, but the thought is that if one can make a credible argument, a presentation, that we don't trip up on this no significant adverse effect, then we'd be free to proceed. The other designations are much more confining in terms of what can go in there, so we didn't go there in terms of allowing to use the GP and say a PUMA or a RUCA, so resource and uses conservation area. Those are more highly protected areas as well as the PUMA.
And certainly the RIA,
And the
exclusion area.
Yep.
And let me just back up. What we're trying to do in these eligibility requirements is make it as black and white as possible. So either the DSL or the applicant could be looking at what's written here and know to a reasonable certainty that they can use the GP or they can't. So that's another one of those filters.
And as a practical matter, if it's truly a research and demonstration project, and if it isn't a R&D project masquerading as an R&D project that's meant to have future commercial build-out, then if I'm counseling somebody in the wave energy industry, I'm steering toward an area that would be able to test devices, and it wouldn't be sort of a placeholder for, I'm going to get my foot in the door, I'm going to be there, and in a year or two I'm coming in with a full-blown development once I prove up my technology. And if I actually had customers and I could serve them at a price that wasn't shoved down their throat, then I will be there now. So I think that's. So help me understand here. So you've got these here. Is there now all of this other stuff about if you went into a RUMA, which I think would be a very controversial decision if we were to go forward with that, to do that? Where's that spelled out, the rest of the stuff you're going to tell us about, or is it articulated elsewhere?
As we get further.
Thank you.
And I'm not quite sure what you're saying, but
You're so full of nuance.
Were you saying that if somebody has a research or demonstration project, and then a year from after they've done it, they're ready to go full bore, and that we'll give them
we've had an unfortunate history in the last decade of projects and companies that would characterize their project as a pilot project, and then lo and behold, we found out in the filings and then what they were trying to do, that there were very large commercial build-outs proposed. Not in retrospect that those had a ghost of a chance of happening given the circumstance and the state of the technology and the lack of customers, but it was still disconcerting, to say the least, that it was obvious that the so-called and this is what we've complained about, some of us have complained about it, and we need our rules need to respect this. For things that are truly demonstration projects, that are short-term, that further the idea of getting out there in a place that works,
to get this research and development done. Very hard to find people that will quarrel with that. What we do have heartburn about are projects that sort of get in the ground, that are very long-term in duration, that actually do have a lot of impacts, difficult to gauge on the environment, easy to gauge on other users of the ocean, but they get a foot in the door, they're there for a long, long time, and they really are basically phase one of a much larger build-out. So we want transparency when we, and I think those of us that want to be constructive players in this process really want to find those obvious things that are temporary duration, truly research. Pull those out, let those go forward, but be on guard that we're not going to be fooled again by having projects that are really staging for much larger build-outs that require a much more robust conversation about, if they were to happen, what the impacts of the environment and the communities would be.
So we've
I
got
hope that's a little more pointed than mine.
Yeah,
Because that's what, we've had a lot of those discussions in the first one or two of our meetings where we're going back and forth on it.
So we've got some language coming up that we think is a good way to make sure that sort of activity doesn't happen. But
and in the definitions, we do, it's not defined the duration, but it does say limited duration. So there's your first side.
Yeah, what's a limited duration? 30
It's coming.
years?
That's the way
It's coming. It's coming.
Yeah. Okay. So notwithstanding OAR 141093 definition for ocean renewable energy, project cannot involve ocean offshore wind power generation. So this is only for wave energy. Removal and fill is limited to the territorial sea only. No removal or fill in wetlands or other waters of the state is authorized, and that's would be considering anything once you're getting onshore. And because of that, we're not requiring mitigation activity in response to the impact of this testing. All components of the project must be entirely removable upon project completion. And again, we'll talk more about that. So next is the general permit specific application requirements. In addition to application requirements pursuant to 141093-0105,
which basically just says use the joint permit application.
The applicant must provide the following information in an application. A JART recommendation for processing the proposed project under this general permit. A map that clearly illustrating location of the proposed ocean renewable energy facility placement relative to ARESA, REPA, or ROMA. A completed resource inventory and effects evaluation pursuant to Part 5 of the Territorial Sea Plan. And for projects, proposed projects within the RUMA, the resource inventory and effects evaluation must clearly demonstrate that there's no significant adverse effects on inventoried marine resources and uses.
I can wait till you're done with your, are you doing section by section, or are we just,
We're going to try to get to the whole thing.
Yeah.
oh,
Number 4, description of how the project meets the definition of demonstration or research as defined in this rule. And number 5, methods and timing for facility deployment and recovery. Description of the anchoring and attachment systems, the area of the seabed to be covered by anchors, and any other equipment affixed to the seabed.
The reason why it cannot become clear in just a minute.
hello, this is Department of State Lands Ocean Renewable Energy Rulemaking Advisory Committee. Welcome, whoever just joined us.
Hey, this is PA3 Jonathan Klingberg at the Public Affairs Detachment in Astoria.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
We're just running through the removal bill general permit draft right now.
Okay, yeah, I apologize for being late.
Number 6, if project includes cables, pipes, or conduit between devices or from devices to the shore, The application must describe method of placement and recovery consistent with Part 4 of the Territorial Sea Plan. So burying, etc. If they want to keep cables, this is an aside, if they want to keep cables, they need to apply for an IP later. Keep cables buried. Onshore terminus of pipes, cables, and other conduit must be clearly identified.
Do you want to take questions here or wait?
Let's wait.
Okay.
And just keep note of them.
Fees, notwithstanding provisions for annual payments pursuant to OAR 141-093-01202, application fee and annual billing fees for a total of, and this is due for discussion, 3 years or 5 years, are required to be paid in advance with the application. We want to basically prepay for the whole term that it's in, up to a maximum of 3 or 5, which will be discussed.
The normal process is to bill people annually, which is a hassle for them, it's a hassle for us. Our proposal here is pay us up front for the full duration of the permit. We haven't decided yet if it's 3 years or 5 years or whatever other number, but let's just collect it all up front and be done.
And the general permits normally last 5. So that would be the maximum possible on your general permit. Authorized activities. This general permit authorizes the placement and removal of renewable energy facilities for the purpose of research or demonstration in the territorial state in an amount not to exceed 0.5 acres of footprint per project. I don't know if we'll have to change that. Or includes that. The footprint includes anchors and other equipment affixed to the seabed. Footprint does not include equipment floating on the ocean surface or cables, pipes, or conduit extended to the ocean shore. And that was because, as Kirk said before, if you just did the cables or any other conduit to shore, we'd already be kicking them out of what they could do because of those.
Say that again?
If you take the area that would be required to extend a connection between the device to the onshore, you'd already be at your 0.5 acres. And so there would be actually any room to put the device in.
So basically, running the math, if you have a device that's at about the 3 nautical mile limit, and you assume that they're going to be bringing in a cable, and there's about a 3-foot wide swath of disturbance area that comes to shore, that's half an acre right there, just for that cable corridor. So we're proposing not to include the corridor to shore as part of that 0.5 acre limitation, because it would leave nothing for the site.
Right.
You're also proposing that you don't include the surface expression of the project or any mid-water expression, only the footprint on the floor.
So the foot...
Because that space is used up in the ocean by the project, in the water column or on the top of the water. So I'm just curious about the reasoning
So,
for that.
so I know this is going to be a big point of discussion for it, so let's not jump 100%
about that too, so but I think we
Okay.
can keep moving.
Okay.
General permit specific conditions. Number 1, all requirements, procedures, and conditions set forth in OAR 141-093-135, general conditions, apply to this general permit except as follows. So these 4 are what we're saying right now, would not apply to this general permit. General condition 5, the ODFW fish passage requirement. B, general condition 8, pre-construction resource area flagging or fencing or flagging. C, general condition 9, erosion control methods. And D, general condition 11, raising or redirecting water. Some of these just seem to be
Terrestrial.
terrestrial. 2, authorized facilities, including cables, pipes, or conduit extending to shore must be entirely removed from the territorial sea within 3 or 5 years of the authorization date, not the installation date, but authorization date, unless an individual removal fill permit pursuant to 141-085 has been issued for extended or expanded ocean renewable energy facility placement.
That starts to get to Mr. Houston's concern about you get your foot in the door and then all of a sudden you're free to do whatever you want. That's not the case. If you want to go bigger or longer, you have to stop and go back through the individual process.
Fish screens must be installed on any water intake or discharge devices associated with the ocean renewable energy facility. Fish screens must be compliant with ODFW fish screening guidelines. I don't know if that's what ODFW has yet for ocean.
I have some recommendations right there.
Okay. Work area isolation, that was, I think that was an ODFW input already. Yeah. Okay. Any cables, pipes, or conduit extending to the ocean shore must be placed consistent with Part 4 of the Territorial Sea Plan. 6, required notifications. The authorization holder must submit to the department a letter verifying the removal of all ocean renewable energy facility components, including cables, pipes, or conduit extending to the ocean shore. And a verification letter is due to the department within 30 days of completing it. B, notification of any observed sinking or disconnection of floating components, substantive movement of anchors from the point of placement, entanglement of fishing gear, any release of fluids, or any exposure of buried components, Notification is required within 24 hours of observance and must include a corrective action plan.
So that's our first shot at it. I'm not sure how we want to start with comments. Do you want to start back at the beginning and open it up?
I'd say if we could go through it in a logical fashion, that from beginning to end, I think would make.
Let's give that a try.
Yeah. Okay. So, purpose? Do we want to start?
Any comments on the purpose statement? They're never more than one sentence long in the administrative rules, so I'm just warning you. I'm not going longer than a sentence.
I just wonder if you can't help but look at non-commercial and really, I mean, all of this is about commercial applications, and is it, so I'm not falling on my sword to say that should change. It's just curious to me that non-commercial would is that really meant to infer that it's not meant for grid connection? Or I'm not sure how you.
Are we in the purpose statement?
Yeah, where is
We
it?
moved into definitions.
Yeah, so we're already
Let's,
went back.
let's make sure. Are there any comments on the purpose sentence?
I'm sorry.
Hearing none, seeing none. Definitions? You're scared of me.
Justin, if you're here, this is your opportunity to give any comments on the purpose statement.
Well, so
Hold on.
Scott.
Scott, go ahead.
Well, the only thing I was thinking was that since we're talking about a research demonstration project, could the purpose statement include just some reference to the short temporal nature of the activity?
well, we define that when we for research and demonstration projects. So I don't know if we wanted to be redundant.
If we're limited to one sentence, getting into that in that one sentence, I think.
That's my concern. I mean, we could add, I suppose we could add a phrase that says, for limited time.
But then now what does that mean?
Yeah, right, that doesn't tell you.
For up to 3 years. We could say, whatever it is, we could say, make it very clear for anybody looking to use this type of a process, that this is only for this is a temporary thing. This has nothing to do with a long-term.
And that would even mirror what the definition of a research project in 7 is, limited duration, which again, that begs the question, what are we talking, 3 years, 30 years? I mean, some of these so-called pilot projects that were being applied to for FERC were very long-term duration. And they were, for all intents and purposes, they were kind of permanent.
Because if you just take the look at this from the beginning, you're thinking, okay, this is the process for permitting renewable energy facilities, but it's not. It's only for permitting these temporary testing or demonstration. So why not make that very, very clear in the purpose statement that that's what this section is all about?
Oh, there you go. It's not
That's-
temporary. Temporary research and demonstration purposes. There's one for
Let's get some other viewpoints on
The
that.
Adelia and then Rick.
Yeah, so Scott, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and actually my first comment on here when we get to the definitions was to have a conversation about duration. Both definitions, 1 and 7, include the limited duration in them, so I'm comfortable with, the purpose statement says research and demonstration, and then research and demonstration are both defined to include a limited duration, and then we're gonna need to define limited duration. So I'm comfortable with that. Would you be comfortable with that, or are you trying to say it needs to be in the purpose statement?
I just thought it would be clear to applicants that we said temporary. I mean, I think Joanne's idea of putting temporary in is logical, and it is one more word, but it makes it clear from the onset, that's what we're talking about here.
This is quick. Back in the OPAC days, we spent like 3 meetings. And
9 months.
So I'm not
Further on in our work list are 2 places where we will discuss 3 years or 5 years. And the input I can give you is power plants are 50 to 100 year life installations. And in order to achieve the research and development objectives, you have to demonstrate reliability to utility grade. And what we're learning in another project that I'm working on, and with input from Wave Hub over in England, the utilities want 5 years of data for reliability analysis. So, the gentleman to my left proposed 3 years in the purpose statement, but we haven't gotten to whether it's 3 years or 5 years, so that would be...
Well, maybe
I was proposing an example of a defined amount of time, not necessarily one or the other.
I mean, if, at the risk of agreeing with Scott and setting a precedent, if we decided on 5 years later and said 5 years in the purpose statement, I'd have no objection with that.
Should we
But I
see
want this
how
to
that?
become a pattern.
Why don't we see how that discussion plays out, and then we can decide whether or not we change the purpose.
We've already agreed once today.
Yeah, I was gonna say for the record, you guys have already come to consensus on the side of that.
I know.
Side we're trying to apply. And this is going to be a very important conversation because I would like the proprietary time to line up with the general permit with regards to research and demonstration projects. Right now in the leasing rules, we have those being authorized for up to 5 years. So if we end up changing that with this general permit, I would probably like to be consistent, make sure that we change that. The other set of
More
rules
about
to
that? So you said, what kind of lease is up to 5?
temporary use authorizations are up to 5 years.
Okay.
And actually, general permits right now are up to 5 years, but we'll have that conversation more. Charlie?
I'm just going to reiterate, Scott, Joanne, I think that temporary would be a good solution in that statement. It's not going as far as defining. I also don't think, I kind of disagree with Delia on that what it says is, ocean renewable energy facilities for research or demonstration purposes. It doesn't really call them out as research or demonstration projects, which are explicitly defined. So the purpose versus the project, I think, is kind of a little tricky there.
So there's certainly no harm in changing purposes to project to make it comport with the.
Or that would be another way to go about it. You could change that.
the longer and the bigger starts to be less and less something one might want to have a GP or a GA for, because it's really starting to look like something else.
Well, let's get through the other side boards and see if that concern still holds at the end of the day. So I'm catching these as we go along.
So are we still?
So DSL is going to look at changing the term purposes to project to make it comport with the defined terms.
Right. So if I could have to define that.
I would, purpose to project might be the solution.
We'll take a look.
Yeah.
Give it a few reads with your.
And with the definitions, we you can't change those, so
Yeah.
it'd be an easier way. Okay, so since the definitions are,
I have questions on the definitions. Sorry, I didn't understand, so you said a couple times how we can't change those. I didn't understand that when I was doing my review.
not within this.
So let's dig into that a bit. So demonstration project is already defined in 319, right?
I believe demonstration project.
Where is that?
I really don't.
It's defined, I thought demonstration project was defined in 2 places and not 319. That was defined in Part 5 of the Territorial CPROD plan as a pilot project, which then also cross-referenced to the demonstration, the definition of demonstration project in OER 141, 140.
Something like that.
So it might not be statutorily tied, but it's rule tied.
Well, so then my issue would be, can we add a definition for limited duration?
We are, yeah, we can add, and I'm sorry if you were.
Yeah, that's what
I wasn't meaning
I was
that
trying to
this is
figure out.
it and you're
Okay.
stuck with it. It's
Okay.
just, if there's a definition here already and it was pulled from something else, we can't change the words here and not change it where we sourced it from.
Okay. So I have a couple of comments throughout definitions. Are we going to go through them?
Go ahead and then we'll
Okay.
go into this.
So I'll start with limited duration was my concern. This comes into play in definitions 1 and 7, and just that needs to be defined. And I think that conversation relates also to application requirements 4 and 7 and conditions 2 and 6A. So there's a lot of places throughout the document where it would all need to be tied together and make sense for all of those different purposes. When ODFW was looking through it, we were looking at, pilot, it does equate to demonstration in Part 5, and that's up to 5 years. Also at the federal level for grid-connected projects, the FERC pilot project, or pilot license, would be up to 5 years. So there's a trend developing here for pilot and demonstration projects to be up to 5 years. I think one of the things that my agency is concerned about is that be well defined to contain the period of authorization. So it's from the date of authorization to the date of surrender, or whatever you call it when DSL's permits expire, rather than from the date of installation to the date of decommissioning. And so in practicality, that probably translates for projects in the ocean to far less than 5 years of actual impact. And so that's just something I wanted to bring to the group. Our input would be that we could be comfortable with 5 years, but it should be 5 years for the full duration of the authorization, not necessarily because of practical, constraints of working in the ocean. That might not translate to 5 years of actual testing or data gathering.
See, that's why I appreciate you bringing that up, because if you need to do some baseline surveys and then that bumps you out of a work season, I think the reasonable is from the time of installation to the time of removal is the period, and any preceding study or data gathering would not count against that. Otherwise, it's...
So let me clarify, Rick, that's not what I was saying. So I was saying from DSL, so DSL is going to issue a permit and that permit's going to expire. Well, I'm saying that period should be 5 years. So whatever that particular developer needs to use that 5 years of authorization for, they may need to do something in there, in order to ground truth or try something out before they're comfortable putting their device in. But that's going to be up to the site-specific, project-specific analysis to sort out what happens within that 5 years for the sake of the GP.
So let's tease that out. If I decide that I want to do something during my 5-year window, that's my responsibility. But if there's a condition on the permit that's subject to getting some data or submitting some surveys, it's an imposed requirement. That imposed requirement should count against the developers 5
For
years.
example, 6 months of pre-deployment data gathering.
Yeah.
Which I don't anticipate for this anyway, but
There's no condition in here that, as from what's been proposed so far, that would
I agree.
go along those
That's kind of
lines.
his
Okay, so an example, I think, let me try to, I think what you're saying is, so ODFW comes in and says, we want you to do, some survey for fish, and it has to be next summer. So that's going to delay you by 9 months, right? So then that shouldn't subtract from the 9 months of your 5 years, is what you're saying.
Right.
Right. So those would be add-on conditions, and I don't know if we can figure that out in this language, right?
Wouldn't you do that work before you apply?
That's what I was trying to understand, but then what I heard from Jason over here is that maybe I don't know, would you guys give somebody a completed application and say, all right, you're ready to go on these conditions, once you meet these conditions? Because to me, that it's not complete until they've met all the conditions. Is that correct?
So yeah, I mean, if there's still data or information that's required to shape the permit or to inform the permit, well then, right, there's no sense in issuing that permit.
Right. So, I mean, the question to me is like, when does the clock start? Right? That's the question we're trying to answer. And to me, it's like when you have permission to deploy.
Yeah.
And that means that you've met your conditions by that point. So
Permission to deploy the wave energy converter, for instance, as opposed to permission to deploy an ADCP and a wave measurement device.
But you're tackling those, and this is why this is something that I think is still a benefit to the industry, is that we're tackling the deployment of scientific equipment under special use rules.
Okay.
And also trying to recognize and be sensitive to that concern about the first right to apply, tying that option to the special use rules as well. And I'm sorry, Kurt, that doesn't cover the regulatory side. I'll let you touch
So
that.
regulatorily, you're never going to get to 50 cubic yards with those two things that you just described. So you're not going to need a removal from permit. It's only when you're talking about the wave energy device, the thing that's going to generate electricity.
So I think the clarification that is needed here is you would issue the removal fill permit when all of the data is satisfied for all the conditions. Okay, let me step back. So the GP is conditional, right? So in that example, ODFW works with the group and says, we really think that we need some, monitoring done or something. You would not issue the removal fill permit until all of those conditions were complete?
So monitoring, you'd have to tell me more about what's the nature of the monitoring.
I don't know. I mean, it's just a completely random example, and I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I'm just, the point was he doesn't want it to take away from the 5 years.
Yeah, right. So if it's monitoring that you need to have before the device is deployed, then we're not going to issue the permit until the monitoring is done.
Okay.
If it's monitoring that can occur concurrent with the device being deployed, then fine.
Okay.
yeah, that's what I was going to. I mean, there will be adaptive management conditions, right? And those are going to be post-deployment learning and reacting to. I don't think that we can reasonably write language into shifting the timeline around those sort of expectations of our projects. But if you're not going to give somebody a permit until the conditions have been met in general, then it seems like that makes sense for when the clock should start. As a wave energy developer, then that's something that you need to know, that the clock starts now, and you need to know exactly when that clock starts so that you know what your window is.
So at the risk of presuming reasonableness, if we're getting close to it and you're getting ready to consider preparing to perhaps issuing the permit, but we're into the middle of crab season or the big blows, it would be swell or fun if we could say, okay, we're not going to want to go out there until they're done crabbing, so can we have the permit start date April 15th or something like that?
Yeah, well, what we do is you'd simply ask for an extension of the decision deadline to.
Okay.
Joanne,
Because, you know, like if we get it approved December 1st,
Right. And then you'll wait till.
Yeah,
we're not gonna go.
that's on you guys to keep an eye out and then figure out when is the most advantageous time for you to have.
Jason?
I apologize if this is down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I just found myself here confused. Talking about conditions, we're using as an example that maybe ODFW imposes some condition that delays the installation, and we've agreed that the clock starts ticking when they're authorized at some point. But this issue of the conditions, what is the basis under this rule language that gives any agency the authority to require a given test or monitoring or anything other than meeting the basic requirements of the permit?
I'm not sure I understand
Yeah,
the question, Jason.
Yes, it did. My question always.
So, I'm looking at general permit specific application requirements. At JARD, at a map, and complete the resource inventory and effects evaluation, as I'm guessing is what the key is here. And then, other ones are description of why it's a demonstration process, and then the method and timing for deployment, the cables, and then the fees. What is the basis? Where in that is the authority for ODF&W to say, we want you to do a year of acoustic testing before you're allowed to put your device in the water?
Oh, I see.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, all right, so let's play out that example. Maybe it's through the JART process. I'm not sure how that would come to light, maybe through the public review process. But somewhere along the way, ODFW steps forward and says, wait a minute, we have the potential for some significant adverse effects here that don't fit within the sideboards of what GPs allow. We think, DSL, this form of sampling or monitoring is required to determine whether or not there is this potential effect.
And is there a definition of significant adverse effects in the state statutes currently?
Significant adverse effect is something that
I think there's criteria for significant adverse effects in Part 5 of the Territorial Sea Plan for different marine resources.
So if we believe that the requirement is germane to how we make our decision, then sure, we have the authority.
So in which case you kick it into an IP, right? We're out of the general office, the
Not
general
necessarily. A couple things could happen. We could extend the permit decision, GP decision deadline to give you the time to collect that additional data that ODFW is asking about.
Okay. So at some naive point in my past, I was thinking about this process. Okay, so if we get a general permit for a temporary research project that's less than this many years, I assumed that there was going to be very little in terms of the kind of multi-year sort of monitoring or pre-deployment monitoring that has been characteristic of all previous efforts. So I don't know, I'm not sure what M3 did, for example. Were they required to do any pre-testing, pre-monitoring, anything before they were able to deploy their device?
They tiered off of what previous research.
Yeah, no.
That makes sense.
No, I mean, sorry. No, they were not. But I think really kind of what I wanted to say to your original question, where does this come from? It goes back to, so what we're working on today stems from 93. So it goes back to 93 is conditional. The GP is conditional. The GA is not. So the GP is conditional. And so, I mean, I'm very reluctant to get into a discussion of what hypothetical conditions might be on hypothetical projects. But I mean, I can say that that's certainly a very important component to my agency, is that removal field permits be conditional, because we don't know enough about what to expect. they're not something that we consider predictable at this point. So, you know, I guess that's all I can really say at this point. As to whether or not it would be multi-year, I doubt it, but I'm not going to make that assertion now. And I don't think that's what DSL is asking us to do in this rulemaking either. You know, so, I mean, looking at this, you know, what we're looking at today, limited duration for the general permit, we would be comfortable with 5 years. And having that, we could write something in there so that it was very clear that that did not include the period of monitoring.
It's right now it just says measured from the authorization date, the day we issued the permit, and put a date on it. You got 5 years from that day to have everything that's going on.
And it says to complete the resource and materials evaluation, next evaluation, so I would assume that during that evaluation, that's where any red flags that have popped up. And you, okay. Part of the comments, that, and in the chart, that's where you'd be requesting possible additional monitoring.
Yeah, I mean, I'm learning about how this, I'm trying to envision how this would play out too, right? So, what I understand is that the proprietary process is going to be a longer process. You know, so that'll get started, that'll kick off with the JART, and we'll move forward with that, and then at some point, the JART will be asked to decide whether or not, you know, the developer will say, hey, we think we're good to go with a GP, what do you think? Give us a letter, yes, we're good to go. And then this process starts. So, somewhere in there, I think we would have already had the discussion about, you know, any red flags from ODFW, right? We probably would have already been pretty, hopefully very far down that trajectory. What that is going to look like, though, Jason, I couldn't tell you today.
So we were on definitions, and I thought we needed a definition for limited duration, which took us into, you're making a pretty credible argument that it does need to be 5 years. Rick Williams, pretty clear, so 5 years. Are there any arguments to the concerns? Typically, our GPs are 5 years.
That's Chris.
I mean, I think the 5 years is on the outer limits of what any developer is actually going to do, quite honestly. Rick's comments are certainly accurate. If you're trying to demonstrate the commercial viability of your technology, the financiers, the big boys that are going to have to sign off on your technology before they're going to get behind it, they want to see 5 years of data. Is this necessarily what they're, you know, is this the kind of project we're actually talking about to provide that data? Maybe not. I do like the consistency of keeping the 5 years as, you know, all the other permits and the other agencies that deal with this. So there's, you know, there's a reason why that makes sense, just to be consistent. And for that matter, I mean, the more I think about this, the more I realize that, I mean, what are we buying ourselves in terms of a expedited process? Not much, really. If you've got conditional authority, this is just a project, and the requirements, the oversight, the expectation, the cost, the time, the public review is all pretty much what it would be anyway. So I'm questioning the real value in limiting this too much. You're jumping through all the hoops essentially anyway. So the 5 years to me seems, if you're going to do all that anyway, give it 5 years. At least be consistent with the other agencies and permits.
Delia, you had other definitional questions or comments?
I did. Are we moving on to limited duration?
I think so.
Okay. The definition of non-commercial means a use that does not result in or is not associated with any monetary gain. Does any monetary gain mean money made or profit? Because a lot of these experimental devices might come under different funding mechanisms. They might be sponsored by a nonprofit or by the military, whereby you're getting at it gets a little tricky. And the difference between, I think the intent here, as I read it, is that they're not trying to go out there and make money off their device, off their test. They're trying to gather data. But if they're grid connected, they're probably going to want to try to sell their whatever electricity is produced to try to offset their costs. So does that count as monetary gain? Because they're making money if they can sell the electricity, but they're probably still not in the black. See? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to have some dialogue first? I have something to add.
Well, since this definition comes from 140, I think it would help to.
Yeah. So, non-commercial is not defined in statute. The commercial operation, which is defined in here, is from statute and says means a project undertaken to generate ocean renewable energy for a purpose other than research, demonstration, or personal use, and that has profit as a goal. So perhaps we can add the word profit as a goal. I also believe we allow demonstration projects under Division 140 to be grid connected as well. And let me look for that. Maybe temporarily connected to the regional power grid for testing purposes without being a commercial operation. So I'm not sure how to really address it. I just wanted to bring out those two.
So it has profit.
Well,
Without profit as a goal.
no,
That's in the state statute.
there's a big difference between revenue and profit, as anyone who runs a business knows. I mean, you can have revenue, but if your overall costs of doing the deployment exceed your revenue, you're operating at a loss. So it's not profitable. And I'm not aware of anything that we're talking about to be profitable for a long time. So we just need to make sure that we don't get into a distinction that revenue, because the feedback we're getting from the utilities is they want demonstration that you've been able to meet the terms of a power purchase agreement, which is dispatch and reliability, quality, and all that kind of stuff. And that is a power purchase agreement is it's a contract, but none of us expect it to be profitable anytime soon. But
Jason?
Well, I think we're all chewing on the same issue here. I don't have the right answer here, but what I wanted to clarify was, did I hear someone say that the definition of non-commercial comes from somewhere else?
It comes from Division 140, which those rules are also currently open. So whatever we decide on, whether we leave it or whether we change it, we'll
Can you have two different definitions and two different sets of rules?
I think
it's the same definition currently.
I'm asking, can you have two different definitions and two different sets of rules?
Technically, you could. It's generally not considered.
Fair enough. So we know that at least we have some flexibility here. We can either have be inconsistent or go back and change 140. But this is I agree with dealing with this language is unclear, and I think we can improve it. This not associated with any monetary gain. What the heck does that mean? So I would suggest that we change this language somehow to clarify that it's acceptable for a demonstration project to be connected to the grid, to put power onto the grid, and if possible, have some sort of legal contractual deal that demonstrates the power is being sold, because that's a really big advantage for a company that's trying to show that their technology works without necessarily being profitable.
Scott?
Well, we're redefining this. This bothers me a little bit, honestly, because we're taking commercial activity and trying to couch it as non-commercial because it's not going to make a profit. Commercial is commercial. If you're selling something, you're selling a good or a service, you have commercial activity. So I have a little concern that we're delving away from the whole intent of non-commercial. yeah, I agree. These things are a long way from being commercially profitable. But we look at OPT, you know, they started out, and what's to prevent a future developer saying, well, you know, to really demonstrate this project, we need 40 buoys, and you know, we're not going to be profitable, so we're not commercial. But meanwhile, the CEO, what was that guy making? I think at one point he was making $1 million a year on this non-commercial activity. I don't buy it. So I think commercial is commercial. Let's, if they need to put it on the grid, great. But let's not make a commercial activity couched in these non-commercial terms.
Charlie?
Well, I tend to agree with Scott. I think this is getting a little fuzzy, and I think that if you look at a lot of other industries, you know, a commercial fisherman doesn't always take a profit, yet he abides by being a commercial fisherman. He's not a recreational fisherman, based on whether or not he catches enough fish that year. So I can see how certain stakeholders are gonna look at this from a lot of different angles. I also hear the industry perspective on this, but I think we need to move with caution and strong consideration for a broad number of individuals, maybe even outside the ocean energy sector, that might view this a certain way.
Joy?
What is I'm sorry, I was speaking to statute here. I'm trying to align this language with what we have to work with, and where it seems inconsistent with statute, perhaps try to make a recommendation. But what I just heard is that commercial is defined in statute, and that in turn clarifies what non-commercial is. And so why can we not just propose this language refer to that state statute, where non-commercial means a use that does not result in or is associated with any profit as a goal and directly relates to research and demonstration projects? What's the downside to that? Is that not what you just said?
That's the definition.
Yeah, so I prefer to stick to what's in the statute, since we have to do that for Part 5. Why would we not have consistency across, and we can get through this?
Scott?
I guess as I say again, what's to prevent any developer from just saying, well, we're really here just to demonstrate and to show the technology, and we want to take some income off of it while we can, but it's not going to be enough. Profit certainly isn't our goal. We just want to test this out. I mean, a developer will say whatever he needs to say to fit the criteria to get the authorization. I don't think that's a valid excuse. If it's a commercial activity, let's call it what it is.
I'm going to let Mike, because he's sort of leading the show, go first, and then we have it.
I get that concern. My one thought is, if there's a company who is selling power, not profiting from it, maybe the CEO is making $1 million a year. Is that company really going to survive?
Still are.
It's also a 5-year.
It's
still going, by the way.
We're talking temporary use. They can't.
It's 5 years.
Go ahead.
So, Scott, to your point, I guess I'd ask, you know, as long as that developer is meeting the other terms of this permit and all the other requirements of territorial sea plan, does that make a difference? Does the profit make a difference? If they're in and out in 5 years and they meet all these other requirements, does it matter that they're putting power on the grid and selling? I don't know what it does in terms of the concerns that we would have, which are impacts or some sort of count under the nose scenario. As far as I can tell, that's not happening, as far as you know, pre-pass.
Right. And it's a 5-year limited duration.
And they're restricted in the area too, so some of it, you're right.
So I agree with both of those points, but I also really respect what you're saying, Scott. I think I like what Joanne was saying about trying to stick to what's already in statute. We have a definition of commercial operation, but I want to point out that commercial operation definition this is for ocean energy in the rules already. Goes farther than just the monetary gain. It also says that it has to be grid connected. So then if we were going to just flip-flop that and say non-commercial, it would have to be non-grid connected. So I feel like this is a bigger issue that maybe we do need to revisit 140, and hash out commercial and non-commercial, and maybe do that at a different meeting. That's it.
So, great, Delia. Division 140 the definition of commercial operation 140 will be changed to meet the definition in statute now. These rules predate Senate Bill 319, which define commercial operation. So that's going to be gutted and stuffed with whatever is in 274, 870, sub 1. I think it is a good question to, it might be, if we're going to talk to DOJ anyway, it might be worth asking them. We have a statutory definition of commercial operation. What's your take? What should non-commercial look like? Should we really fiddle with it much, or should it just be the antithesis of the statutory definition of commercial operation for non-commercial? Then we come back next meeting with hopefully updates on two things for DOJ. One was interpretation of associated desalinization with power generation. Was that one of the things? And maybe what they think definition of non-commercial should look like in light of what the statutory definition of commercial is.
You know what? Back to that salinization thing from at the beginning of the meeting. Yes. Typically, we see in the land use arena that we have to deal with this all the time, where there's multiple uses on a property, and sometimes it's beneficial to designate something as the primary use, and so you're less encumbered by these subsidiary things that are sort of not at the core of the activity, but they can go forward, and they don't like hang you up because you make the finding that the primary use is this. Just a little.
So I'm going to take just a minute, because we do have public comment on the agenda, and see if there is any public comment. We don't have anyone in the room, but we do have someone on the phone who had called in. So just see if there's anyone who wants to provide public comment to the RAC. Going once? Going twice? Thank you. Mr. Jargi, Mr. de Blasi, you may proceed.
Okay. I think we're still on the definition. So we're coming back with some more thoughts on commercial.
Long discussion on definition.
Other input on definition?
What about your I'm sorry. Comment. What about your comment there on 6? Barely read. Okay, to assume that this term includes any cables, pipes, or other conduits extending from the facility to the ocean shore.
So yes, so to that comment, so many times in this rule we repeat that phrase of ocean renewable energy, including, I'm sorry, let me reread my comment there. Oh, right, so in the rule we repeat over and over again, cables, pipes, and other conduit is a term we use again and again. Is that, can we all agree that those are all transmission lines and not have to keep repeating that term?
Well,
doesn't it all fit within the definition of the facilities?
So Rick and I were sort of whispering each other earlier, because one of the scenario with the Resolute Marine Energy is that optimally at Camp Rylea we would be able to install some reusable conduits instead of having to trench across the beach and lay the hoses through those trenches and then remove them later. If we're going to reuse that site more than once, which we'd like to do, we'd like to install some conduits. We don't know if we can do that because it costs a lot of money. But those conduits are directionally drilled, and they can cost, the estimates are a couple $1 million to do that for the 4 tubes that go through that area. And once they're in, they're in. If we did that in association with a given project, like the Resolute project, are those conduits now coming under this in terms of the control and transmission lines? And would it be then subject to the subsequent requirements in here that everything has to come out of the water? So optimally, what we like to see, the conduits are due to conduits, and they stay there. They facilitate testing and demonstration, but they're not affiliated with any single project, so they're not subject to this requirement that they come out by the time that project is done. That's the situation we're trying to grapple with.
But Jason, if you're going to be making that scale of investments up there, then RIDEA needs to follow the same sort of footprint and vetting and stuff that PMAC and stuff have done, because you're going to...
Conduit would be installed under this stuff. I'm saying it would be permitted under its own set of...
That's a
different thing.
Robust, important...
But wouldn't be somehow tied, if we install those conduits, they wouldn't somehow get tied to any subsequent project, and when that project comes out, somebody says, oh no, you got to take out the conduits because it's affiliated with that
If they're
project.
regulated under a different permit, then those rules apply.
And how would that work? That's sort of...
Especially articulated as an R&D thing, just like Oregon State's doing the grid-connected stuff, and they've got stuff out there, and everybody understands the whole idea is that infrastructure is there to facilitate the testing of multiple leaseholders who go into it. It's the whole idea.
Yeah.
Like,
so from the perspective of the agencies, what does that look like to you? How is that differentiated? How do we ensure that issue isn't problematic?
So you're talking specifically about directional bore of conduit?
Sure.
Okay. Because we have a long-standing read from the Department of Justice that utilities directionally bored under waters of the state are not subject to a removal fill permit. They don't constitute removal fill activity. Where the borehole starts, like being waters of the state, we regulate that, and where the borehole ends, might be in waters of the state, we regulate that activity. But for that portion that's under the water of the state, we don't typically do that as removal fill activity. So actually it's a little confusing in this sort of stuff.
Charlie and then Rick, I think, or Jerry, would you tell me?
Rick
and Charlie.
So in one question that Kirk asked, can we lump this under transmission? Transmission is a specific term as distinguishing from distribution and other stuff. Can we use, you're agreeing with on. Can we use the phrase infrastructure, sea to shore infrastructure to describe, because that can be hoses, pipes, cables, conduits. It's infrastructure. And then the other thing is under Part 5, we established that if infrastructure is at least 1 meter below the surface, it can be decommissioned in place. So we need to make sure that we don't step over that, and because someone's under a temporary permit. For 5 years you might do the directional drill, and you might put cables or hoses through it, and you probably can't get them out. So we anticipated this in Territorial Sea Plan Part 5, and I think it's part of Part 4 as well. It would be more disruptive to try and take a directionally drilled bore out than to decommission it in place. The other thing, the bore has use. So, if somebody, bored, pulled cable or hoses through, and then at the end of it, wanted to decommission that in place, there might be somebody like an institution like Oregon State who might say, we'd like to apply to take responsibility for this infrastructure so that it can be reused. So I just want to make sure we don't get sucked down a removal of everything associated with a temporary project and end up having that become an issue later.
Charlie.
So what I'm hearing is that the industry wants reassurance that they don't have to jerk anything out that would normally be jerked out because of this process. I don't think we're going to come up with that language right now, but is there something that, I mean, is
The
there
jerk part would probably.
I mean, the bottom line is that's what I think you guys are asking for.
Right.
Is there the potential to put in something that, you know, language as we bring something back to the rack that makes that more comfortable for these guys. And on the other hand of that infrastructure is a huge asset.
Right.
So when it's decommissioned, who does it belong to? And how is it used? Because and the reason I think about that is I think about what Google's done, you know, and other people who put in conduit and other things under proprietary use and have used that to their advantage for leasing out other interests. So who does that belong to once the project is over? Does that belong to the state? Does that still, whose is it? Because it is a huge asset.
Well, the ocean, the example would be International Paper's ocean outfall in Bridgeport, which was, the whole point was Gardner, which was going to be repurposed for OPT, at least that's what they were hoping, claiming they were hoping. How much of that, any of that was real, I don't know. But that, still, I can't call myself making little editorial remarks, but I think IP or the owners there still owned it, right? I mean, it's not.
They were the
Yes, they
grantee.
do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the case of, under Division 125, they're in, they're out. If there is some conduit left at the end of 5 years, is it ours?
Could be, that's your guys' discretion. I would think we were in that case.
I don't know if we've had any
Division
leftovers.
125.
Well, so,
And to point out, you know, to pile on what Charlie said, you know, when you look at the regional cable observatories, boy,
I'm sorry.
if there was a conduit that was coming ashore and the state had authority over it because it had been decommissioned in place, you know, I mean, the whole international ocean observation system would just salivate at the chance to use that, kind of like with the array off of Newport. You know, and that's, you know, so it's a huge asset. We just don't want to have someone later say, well, you have to somehow remove a directionally drilled bore liner and cable that's 40 feet below the surface, you know, going out.
Sure. So under the statute, you are allowed, the decommissioning statute, to exclude cables and even anchors that are buried 1 meter below the surface. I don't know how, I mean, I don't know if this will affect the general permit language that we're talking about here. I kind of see the project you're describing, as you've already mentioned, being similar to a NIMRIC type project with a longer time horizon as a
Well,
test
if
facility.
somebody other than someone coming off Rylea or Oregon State wanted to apply for a temporary use, they could go to one of the other REFSAs, or they could go off of Sunset Beach for that matter, not necessarily onto Camp Rylea. But there could be a case where a research and development interest had backing to put in the infrastructure for the 5-year period to prove it. I don't want to make sure that we're not contradicting the decommissioned place provisions that we already have in place.
Is that a hypothetical possibility or something actually practical? That someone is going to do a true R&D thing for 5 years is going to be able
Government,
to...
Microsoft, or Google, I mean, they do stranger things than that.
So it's just it's a vanity project.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's just if the right applicant comes along with the balance sheet to actually wants to make something happen. And that's what we've been waiting to happen. We're working very hard to bring those people on board. Microsoft, as you all probably know, has already funded a at-sea project down in California, underwater data center, and cool it with ocean water instead of air conditioning units. If Microsoft wanted to put in a conduit, directionally drilled conduit for a couple $1 million.
I would just think if they were going to put a conduit in that they knew had a lifespan of 20 years, why would they just get an individual permit for the placement of it and not get a
I
general
agree.
permit. then
I'm not saying it is an unlikely scenario, but it is certainly possible.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like the Camp Arlia project is unique. We're talking about an area that is very important to the development of the marine energy industry because it is a shallow water area for testing and demonstration of the type of devices like the Resolute Marine Energy. There is no other area in the United States for that. And so there's a lot of focus on that. If we were to install some reusable conduits, it would be very valuable to be able to reuse those. And they may have a multi-year, well beyond 5-year useful life. But and I started this, I just want to be clear that scenario, I just want disconnected from a temporary use authorization or the kind of general permit situation we're talking about here. Two different issues. I just don't want them tied together and somehow getting the conduits locked into the requirements of this permit. I think they're two different issues.
Would that conduit that's been bored be something that some other third party, like in Denmark we have the OSU, would be a third party doing that, and then they could be responsible for permitting?
Sure.
The other thing is, if you're going to do a 5-year temporary project, which by this may be grid connected for the purpose of reliability testing, you've got to get the power to shore. And although it was Paul Claren who reminded us, hey, don't discount the possibility of being able to surface lay or trench. If you're going to have a test or a demonstration project and you're going to prove that it works, it's got to be grid connected somehow. So what we're talking about here has to deal with how you get the power to the grid. And that's either a surface lay with a trench across the beach for parks or directional drill, but there is infrastructure and investment involved.
Right. So we have Delia, and I want to kick it back to Kirk and Mike, and we'll discuss game plan for meeting 5.
Okay, so I just wanted to say I also have issues to talk about the grid connection, the language about whether it does or doesn't affect wetlands. I'm not totally confident about that. There's other stuff that we need to think about that's not just marine for these projects, and I'm not sure that that's well covered in the removal, and there's lots more beyond the definition section that we got to today. But I want to ask, could we just agree to the definition of ocean renewable energy facility, which just the question was whether or not transmission line could cover all of that. Well, I don't think it necessarily can, from what I'm hearing from some people, but the definition just says, where is it? The necessary components of a research project, demonstration project, or commercial operation. What does it say, commercial operation?
Why does it say that?
It shouldn't say that.
Well, this is a
That's the definition.
Okay. All right. So anyway, so it's just listing, including, but not limited to. So I'm comfortable with the definition based on that. I don't think we need a definition in here that lists any possible. Is it going to be PVC or aluminum? We don't need to know that for this definition, do we? I think so. Anyway, it's good discussion, but I guess my point is that I still want to discuss things like removal and all those things. So we're not going to get to that today, obviously.
It also says including but not limited to, hoses aren't listed here. For example, an RME project would be hoses, not transmission lines.
Right. But it's not limited to.
Yeah.
So my question is, can we just agree to this definition as sufficient for an ocean energy facility? I vote yes.
I don't think you guys need to vote on it, right?
No.
So
I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that.
We can't talk about it because that's from statute.
Yeah, that's statutory language, right?
Yeah. So there's nothing. Yeah.
Right.
I tend to agree, pointing out that but not limited to.
Yeah.
No, but we're not asking for any add-ons. We're not. So can we just kind of?
Yeah.
Sure.
You were just referring to.
So
when we
moved.
talk about it later.
It is what it is.
So, Chris, this meeting is supposed to adjourn at 4.
It is. Yeah. So I wanted to let you guys talk for a minute as you led this meeting, then we can discuss our game plan for meeting 5.
Okay, well, I think we're going to stop talking given the lateness of the hour and just acknowledge that we're most of the way, but not necessarily through the machines. So we can proceed, I guess, in a couple different ways. We can either just pick up the conversation where we left off the next meeting, or if you guys, any of you have written comments that you want to get in advance of the next meeting for us to start mulling over, maybe that would give us a good heads up so we can be thinking about that. So how about that? If you want to submit written comments on this current draft rule before the next meeting, feel free to do so. There's no obligation. We're going to pick it up where we left off next month.
Hopefully sometime in November. Scott McMullen has a question.
Comment. Given the distance some of us have to travel to come to a meeting, I would like to see our meetings a little longer. Not that I really want to, but it just seems like, to drive 3.5 hours to get here for a 3-hour meeting and then 3.5 hours back. I would rather get more done in a period, so that's my feeling.
Is it 3.5 hours out here?
From Astoria.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Is that a veiled request to meet?
With no traffic.
I was in part of
More meeting in Astoria.
Or maybe we'll just do more in between meetings with, written back and forth with emails so that when we came here, we had one.
We could certainly, I'd entertain a 4-hour meeting.
Well, we have video team. Okay, I don't know if everyone would have that option.
So I support the longer meeting, as difficult as it may be. I think once we're in the room. Secondly, although as much as I'd like to say that we can take care of some stuff on email, I can tell you that I looked at the language before this, and it just doesn't really ring until you're sitting here listening to the comments of other people and you start seeing the different perspectives. So it does help us to talk through it. So I think we should concentrate most of our efforts to the room.
I concur with that.
So I had assumed that you guys wanted to wrap this up at 4, so I was trying to put a bow on it for today, but I'm hearing, is there still some energy to keep going today?
I have energy, but I have an appointment.
I think the reference was for later, for subsequent meetings. maybe.
Set expectations, right?
Okay, well, how's the group feel about a 4-hour meeting instead of 3? Okay?
Let's do 4
Obviously,
hours.
Yeah.
I might need it.
we'll look at
Oh, come on, Delia.
Well, we'll put out blocks.
Don't you love being in it with all of us?
1 to 5, something like that, or noon to 4.
After lunch.
Okay.
And approximate next time, we end a doodle
Yes.
for November. So it'd be
Veterans Day
Yeah, that's a good one.
time. Not on Veterans Day.
We're joking, right?
Before or after, not on Veterans Day. And not on Thanksgiving.
Can we consider Astoria?
Hard.
Or maybe a Camp Riley if Joanne was to host it?
Yeah, we could do Camp Riley. It's
Well, I would
not too far
certainly
out of the way.
consider it. We picked Newport. I thought Newport was closer for all the coastal stakeholders, including, if we didn't have
Yeah.
Hugh Link or Nick Edwards here today. I thought Newport was so centralized for north and south coasties, plus obviously our
I love Newport.
Newport contingent.
I'm sorry, Scott, I vote for Newport.
I'll go to Astoria.
That is kind of central.
I'm not afraid of the coast.
Journey driving from Salem.
What about Lincoln?
You're in Salem, right?
Lincoln City? We could do Lincoln City or
If we're going to do it, Newport's fine.
Pacific City.
Anywhere.
that went on.
Pacific City.
That's right.
How about Pelican Brewery?
I think we're hearing a lot of consensus for Tillamook.
Of course, our South Coast constituents aren't here today.
Exactly, what I hear today. Yeah.
That's what they get for not coming.
Good point.
Maybe we have another day.
I will have a memo on cables for you, which I
Let's see what
don't
we can find.
I don't know if it'll change the conversation much more, but I will touch base with Andy and get that wrapped up. And ask Sabrina to help make a prettier flow chart, at least a draft flow chart. And we'll continue with this discussion. I have a draft proprietary rule pretty much done. I don't know if I want to bring it and get through this issue. And it's a moving target as well, depending on what comes out of some of these other conversations. So I think it'd be really good to try to button up the rule fill rule on the next one. And then we get.
So we just focus
I
on
can,
that?
yeah. Well, we'll just focus on that. If for some reason it's after an hour and a half we're done, I'll bring copies of it. We can just sort of come through it. But Kirk doesn't like that yet. No, it's all removal fill. A couple of follow-up items and removal fill. And yes, we'll send out a doodle poll in the next day, probably tomorrow. Did we say Lincoln City or did we say Tillamook?
Well, it
How do you guys feel about Tillamook?
might depend what meeting space we can find too.
It is normal.
Where was it? We had the OPAC meeting. That was forestry.
It was at the Department of Forestry
There's two major-
office there in Tillamook.
Well, you could-
That's a nice.
Just a
Actually,
utility.
Yeah.
at Central, or
PUD.
at Tillamook PUD, there's a nice little conference. room
Okay.
That would fit this size crowd.
We will look
Okay.
for a room with teleconferencing capabilities and availability in Tillamook first, Lincoln City second.
At the Guard Brewery, I think they have an excellent meeting room and refreshments.
I was wondering about the Pelican Brewery in Pacific City. That might work.
The Guard.
So somebody want to gavel us out? Sheila? All right, cool.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
All over the world.
I like breweries.
He does wild fermentation.
Wild fermentation?